When the Civil War broke out in 1861, nearly 2.3 million men and boys enlisted in the Union Army. About 70% were younger than 23. Tens of thousands were only 16, and just as many were 15. Records even show that hundreds were 13 or younger, with some no more than 10 years old. For many of them, the odds of survival were grim. Tennessee stood bitterly divided in its loyalties between North and South. Nowhere was this tension more intense than in the eastern part of the state, where guerrilla bands swept through isolated farms. Violence was common, and atrocities were committed by fighters on both sides. General William T. Sherman later warned eager young volunteers, "There's many a boy here today who looks on war as all glory, but boys, it is all hell." In his own diary, Thomas Jefferson Yount described the era as a desperate time marked by drunkenness, murder, and a relentless hunger for wealth and pleasure. One July evening along Jellicoe Creek in Campbell County, the Yount family prepared to settle in for the night. Mr. Yount, a rugged farmer with a bushy beard and fiery red hair, rested beside his frail wife and their daughter, Amy Sue, while their son, Tom, home on leave from the Union Army, helped with camp chores. Without warning, a group of rebel raiders burst from the wilderness, shouting and cursing as they rode across the lonely flats, scattering livestock and setting fire to the fields. Acting quickly, 23-year-old Tom followed his father's orders. He guided his mother and 13-year-old sister out through a rear window and into the trees behind the cabin. Hidden among the brush, they watched helplessly as 5 hardened riders dragged Mr. Yount from the shack and set it ablaze. In his diary, Tom later wrote that he dared not move, fearing what the attackers might do to his family. He memorized their faces in the flickering firelight, while his father's cries echoed through the night, sounds that would haunt him for the rest of his life. When silence finally returned, the family crept from hiding and found the elder Yount bound to a jagged rock formation. After burying him, they walked 15 miles across harsh terrain to the home of Tom's uncle. The incident, preserved in a diary now held by his grandson Robert Yount of Huntington Beach, California, revealed Tom's growing resolve. He recognized the 5 men, former acquaintances who had once shared meals with the family, and swore to repay them in kind. Years of hunting rabbits and small game had sharpened Tom's aim and reflexes, earning him a reputation as a calm and deadly marksman. A faded newspaper clipping would later describe him as crack-shot, cool-headed Tom Yount. Once his mother and sister were safe at his uncle's frontier homestead, Tom borrowed a gray saddle pony, armed himself heavily, and set out across the flats in search of his father's killers. For a time, he was listed as a deserter from the Union Army. As Tom explained in his journal, bounty payments for enlistment sometimes tempted soldiers to leave one regiment and join another for extra money, creating confusion in military records. While traveling through mountain streams and refilling his large canteen with cold, clear water, Tom encountered a mountain man known as Chattahoochee Bill. The two camped together beside the Tennessee River, sharing hardtack around a fire while distant gunshots, or perhaps coyotes, echoed through the night. Bill, whose nickname came from the riverbanks of his Alabama birthplace, was old and weathered, his knees failing but his spirit unbroken. Between jokes and stories, he showed Tom the scars left by a bear attack in the Great Smoky Mountains, telling how the wounded animal had fled into the river with Bill's favorite hunting knife still lodged in its back. The following day, Bill believed he spotted the same bear on the far side of the riverbank, the dagger still lodged in its body. Wounded and exhausted, he had once taken shelter in a cave, surviving on whatever food he could find until his strength returned. According to Yount's writings, Chattahoochee Bill carried lasting scars from that encounter, a shattered arm and the loss of one ear. After hearing Tom's story and the description of the desperados, Bill shared information of his own. While scanning the wilderness through binoculars, he had seen a group of men gathered around a fire in a thick patch of brush, roasting rabbits for breakfast. Moving quietly under the cover of night, he crept closer, listening to determine whether their voices belonged to friend or foe. One man, hunched near the flames, had a hooked nose and a dark, shaggy beard. Another stood tall and thin with sharp, weathered features. Bill overheard them mention a place called Crump's Landing, a detail that gave Tom renewed hope. At last, he felt he had a lead. The two men rested that night, encouraged but eager to continue at first light. With distant gunfire echoing across the hills, Tom said farewell to Chattahoochee Bill, saddled his pony, and rode toward Crump's Landing. The Tennessee sun beat down on the rocky plain as he passed through lands scarred by war, speaking with wary survivors who struggled to endure the hardships around them. As evening fell, Tom encountered a group of displaced children who told him they had recently seen the very men he was hunting along the road ahead. Driven by determination, he pressed on. Though bugle calls in the distance stirred his longing to rejoin his fellow soldiers, his conscience urged him to seek justice for his father. In Crump's Landing, Tom ate at a small hash house and drank a measure of whiskey. Later he would write, "In the morning it's coffee, and in the evening whiskey that primes the pump." Yet word of his presence spread quickly, and soon the hunter became the hunted. One afternoon, unarmed and on foot, Tom crossed an open meadow to visit a young woman he had met the night before. Why he allowed himself that moment of carelessness was never explained. A sudden gust of wind swept across the plain, stirring dust into the air. From behind a cluster of rocks emerged 4 riders, the 5th outlaw having already died. "Tom, I hear you've been looking for us," their leader called out. Tom later wrote that he expected to be shot immediately, but the men seemed confident and perhaps eager to toy with him. Without warning, the leader struck him with a hickory stick, knocking him to the ground. Dazed, Tom pretended to lose consciousness until he regained his senses. His hand closed around a rock, and in a sudden motion he hurled it, knocking the leader from his horse. Grabbing the fallen stick, he fought back as the others rushed toward him. In the struggle that followed, Tom managed to disable another attacker. Knives flashed, bodies collided, and a pistol fell to the ground. Seizing it, Tom fired at a man charging toward him, forcing him back. Amid the chaos, grappling, stumbling, and desperate blows, another assailant fell. Moments later, a rifleman appeared, the steel of his weapon glinting in the sunlight, but Tom's shot rang out first, ending the threat. A third attacker lunged forward with a heavy branch, tearing Tom's clothing and wounding his leg. Acting on instinct, Tom struck back with his knife, bringing the fight to an end. Just before he collapsed from exhaustion, he saw the final outlaw, bleeding and shaken, flee into the brush and vanish from sight. When Tom regained consciousness, the man was gone, disappearing as quickly as he had come. Fortune seemed to favor Tom, much like a gambler with luck suddenly on his side. An elderly woman known as Mammy Taliaferro came driving across the sun-baked plain in her buggy and found him injured. She lifted him aboard and carried him to her home, where she nursed him back to health. In his writings, Tom later explained that he had been on furlough from his regiment at the time and was unable to return on schedule. When questioned by the Army, he claimed illness as the reason for his absence, though his explanation did little to satisfy officials and would trouble him years later when he applied for a pension. He noted in his journal that an infantry private earned about $13 a month. After the Civil War ended in 1865, Tom headed west and joined U.S. Marshal Forces tasked with suppressing remaining bushwhackers. While traveling through the remote hollows near Cumberland Gap, he was ambushed by 2 bandits who disarmed him and threatened his life. Rather than stand exposed, Tom threw himself down a steep embankment, using the terrain for cover. When the attackers came searching, he emerged with a knife concealed in his boot and fought his way free. Only afterward did he learn that the men were related to the same group responsible for his father's death, families known locally for violence and feuding. Realizing the danger of staying in the area, Tom decided it was wiser to move on. For years, he rode across Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, and Kentucky, driven by the search for the last man connected to his father's murder. His wandering life brought him many encounters, and though he married several times, he rarely remained in one place for long. He spent 2 years riding with U.S. Marshals in Missouri, and once tracked a murderer across vast country toward the mountains near Idaho. According to his diary, in 1875 he traveled from Texarkana all the way to El Paso, Texas, a journey that took 3 months and included his wife and young son. Later, while hunting buffalo near Hillsboro, New Mexico, he rode alongside Doug Rambo and John Poe. During this period, he also traded with native communities, learned portions of their language, and earned enough respect to be called Long Tom, perhaps a reference to his height of over 6 feet. One story from his journal involved an encounter with Billy the Kid, who supposedly boasted that the stage drivers around Hillsborough were so nervous he could stop one using nothing more than a stick and a corn cob. A wager was made, with Tom holding the money. From a rocky vantage point, Tom and Poe watched as the kid attempted the stunt on a steep mountain grade. Against all expectations, the driver obeyed the bluff, allowing the kid to seize the strongbox, though when it was opened later it contained only documents rather than cash. The following day, the group celebrated in Kingston's many saloons, only to discover that the clever stage driver had hidden the real money elsewhere, turning the whole episode into a joke at the kid's expense. Tom never crossed paths with Billy the Kid again, but he continued his relentless search for the final outlaw tied to his father's death. His travels eventually brought him to Lajitas, Texas, where he questioned strangers about a man bearing a distinctive scar on his neck, a reminder of an earlier knife fight. The town, he noted, was known for its intense heat and harsh conditions. A few weeks later, under a dim quarter moon and a sky scattered with stars, Tom lay resting in a small hotel room in Lajitas. The quiet night was suddenly broken by gunfire and angry shouts echoing through the streets, signaling that yet another violent encounter was about to unfold. Yount sprang from his bed, peered through the window, and saw a band of horse thieves moving through the streets, driving off animals and leaving chaos behind them. He quickly dressed, fastened his cartridge belt, and hurried outside to gather a posse. Within minutes, they had assembled every usable horse and weapon they could find. The group consisted of a dozen Mexican farmers, a young indigenous boy, and 3 white men, including Tom himself. The thieves headed toward the Rio Grande, crossing at a shallow stretch of sandbars before the river plunged into the dramatic walls of Santa Elena Canyon. Yount's party followed, but soon after crossing the river, they were ambushed by a ragged band of riders. The local vaqueros scattered for cover among rocks and brush as gunfire echoed across the flats. Amid the confusion, Tom's pony carried him into the bed of a dry wash, where he rolled clear and found shelter among sage and creosote bushes. From the hillside, he spotted one of the bandits racing out of the scrub with a rifle. A posse member recognized one of the stolen horses and shouted in alarm. Tom raised his double-barreled shotgun and fired, bringing the charge to a sudden end. As the fight continued, another thief stepped into the road and was quickly overwhelmed by the pursuing riders. Passing the fallen man, Tom noticed a fine pair of pearl-handled revolvers and a belt heavy with coins. Without stopping, he cut the belt free and secured it beneath his saddle, realizing the thieves were carrying far more wealth than he had expected. One of the posse men was badly injured, and with scattered horses still to be gathered, the group decided to camp overnight. As darkness settled in and the others rested around the fire, Tom slipped quietly back toward the battlefield. There he recovered the pearl-handled revolvers and searched the area for additional silver. Beneath a fallen horse, he discovered saddlebags filled with coins and nuggets. Through the night, he gathered what valuables he could find, eventually hiding the treasure on the Mexican side of the border at a spot he carefully described in his journal. Before dawn, he returned to camp, just as renewed gunfire shattered the silence. The scattered bandits had regrouped and were advancing again, their horses thundering through the sage. For nearly an hour, bullets flew from all directions as the exhausted posse struggled to hold their ground. Finally, worn down and unable to see their attackers clearly, the group withdrew toward the river, hoping to escape the relentless pressure behind them. The rider's saddle had a double cinch, and the rear strap made it difficult for his horse to swim. While the others provided covering fire, they shouted for him to cut it loose, but he seemed unable to understand. Seeing the danger, I stepped into the open and used my knife to mimic the motion of cutting the strap. At last he understood, freed the cinch, and managed to guide his horse towards safety. Just as the animal struggled up the bank, a shot struck it behind the saddle, sending it collapsing back into the river. The rider disentangled himself and reached safety on foot. After regrouping, we decided not to pursue the thieves any farther. During the ride back, my thoughts turned constantly to the treasure I had hidden. what it might provide for my family, and how I would someday return it to Texas. None of the bandits had seen me bury it, or I doubt I would have lived to tell the tale. Later, according to his diary, Tom examined the money belt he had taken from one of the fallen outlaws and discovered that nearly all the silver pesos were gone, leaving only 2 coins. Those coins, he wrote, eventually came into the possession of his grandson, Robert Yount. In later years, Thomas Yount rode out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, serving as a deputy under Judge Isaac Parker, known as the Hanging Judge. His commission, signed by Marshal Jacob Yose, was said to hang in his grandson's office. He spent part of his life raising horses in Oklahoma, while continuing occasional deputy work, holding an Indian lease southeast of Ardmore near the Marshall County line. Tom Yount never located the 5th man he had spent much of his life searching for. For reasons that remain unclear, he also never returned for the buried silver pesos and nuggets. He died on April 3, 1913 in Medill, Oklahoma, at either 75 or 77 years of age, depending on which records one believes. His grandson Robert later admitted he had never felt adventurous enough to recover the rumored treasure near Huntington Beach. "I'm not like my grandfather," he once said, a man remembered as one of the toughest of the tough.